Well, I mean, I think, in fact, I was at a keynote last week where we had a big discussion on this. And really, I mean, pretty much we're using AI to fight AI, is really what it comes down to. And no matter how you look at it, the cyber criminals, the bad guys, they tend to lead, and then we tend to lag, and it goes back and forth, you know, kind of almost like the Cold War, it kind of goes back and forth where both sides, you know, um, you know, both sides innovate and then come down, and they innovate and they come down, and both sides respond, and that's really where we're at now. I mean, we see where cyber criminals are, they are using AI tools to better their dev process, to be able to collect data and to be able to, find better targets, and, companies to attack, to negotiate ransomware.
Hello, and welcome to the Smarter Online Safety Show. I'm your host, Jocelyn King, the Queen of Online Safety. Hello, and welcome to the Smarter Online Safety Show. I'm your host, Jocelyn King, the Queen of Online Safety, and welcome to our special Father's Day edition where we are honoring fathers who are protecting their families. And man, back if it wasn't hard enough in medieval times, it certainly is the hardest it could ever be now with AI cyber criminals out there and physical, criminals out there and everything. And we have an incredible guest for you today. So I am so happy to introduce our guest who's exemplified this. Gary Hayslip has spent more than 2 decades doing one thing, keeping people safe in a digital world. But he didn't start in a corner office. He started in the US Navy, so thank you for your service. And he worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to protecting some of the most sensitive networks in our country. From there, he became the very first Chief Information Security Officer for the entire city of San Diego, guarding a whole city's worth of data from 500,000 attacks a day. Then he went global, protecting a $200 billion investment fund and personally vetting the security of more than 700 companies. He's an author. He's a sought after speaker at the biggest security conferences in the world. I've gotten the pleasure of getting to hear him speak at RSA and Black Hat and all the top cybersecurity conferences where he is incredibly respected by all of his peers who look up to him and look to him for advice. And he's mentored an entire generation of leaders coming up behind him. But here's the line that he says that particularly makes me excited about bringing him on the show. He says the best security isn't built on fear, it's built on strategy, trust, and common sense. And that's exactly what we believe here. So welcome to the show, Gary Hayslip.
Thank you. I'm blushing here. So
Good, good. Well, that's why we
thank you
have
very much.
video. We have a lot of people listening on audio on our streaming platforms, but for those of you watching on YouTube, you get to see Gary blushing. That's good. Appropriate for Father's Day. We hopefully fathers get to blush with people thanking them and complimenting them because you deserve it. Everyone has a personal story that got them into security and cyber and something that was a trigger or an interest point for them. And we'd love to know what yours is. What got you into this, Gary?
Um, and honestly, it was kind of an accident. You know, since I was about 8, I was always breaking things and taking things apart, trying to figure out how things work.
Awesome.
And yeah, and I was playing with computers then. Of course, they were a lot larger and more expensive, and and they were kind of like home projects back then when you would kind of put them together. Um, and so I'd always been around them, per se. And then when I was in the military, my job was focused on electronics and weapon systems and IT,
Mm,
on doing IT and but I worked with people that were doing security, and
mm,
I got really interested in what they were doing and the way they looked at things and the concerns that they had. And this was in the early 90s when nobody was thinking about a lot of the network warfare type, cybersecurity stuff that we think of today. But,
right.
that was in the beginning stages where I started looking at stuff and really started thinking kind of long term. All right, we're building these networks, but I was really appalled at how you could get into things
Right. You did not have to
inadvertently.
even have a tremendous amount of skill
No,
to be able to.
and
It's
there
kind of
really
like somebody
wasn't.
left the back door open,
Yeah,
right? Walking.
but back then, the networks and stuff weren't built to
Mm,
go ahead, and because they didn't think, why would somebody want to break in here? Why would somebody want to take my data? This doesn't make any sense,
right.
and then in the late 90s, as I was a CIO in the U.S. Navy, one of the guys
And what
that
does that stand for our listeners who aren't familiar?
I was the chief information officer.
Perfect.
And so my whole day is focused on email and making sure applications worked, and and that the desktops and laptops work, basic daily day-to-day stuff.
Right.
But one of the people that worked for me was doing cybersecurity for us,
Hmm.
and he was brilliant, and and paranoid. And it was interesting. I spent a lot of time with this gentleman and got to know him really well, and the way he viewed and the way he looked at things. And it was the first time that I really got involved in using the Linux operating system, and started seeing how he was looking at every time he looked at a network or looked at an operating system or a computer, he was constantly thinking about how things could be attacked, how things could be
Right.
used against us, how, well, how people could do damage to things.
Yeah.
And I found more and more that that was just really interesting, and I wanted to do that. And so for a while there, I was kind of doing, being a CIO, doing, IT, and doing technology, and I was doing security. And eventually I just, moved more into security. But,
I love
so
that. Yeah.
kind of a long, kind of a, explanation. And I find a lot of us that are CISOs, many of us started in IT, or we started in something else and kind of found our way towards security.
Right. Well, and for people listening at home, a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, we've also called it CISO and stuff, it is just Chief Information Security Officer focused on that. And you brought up, the person you were following being paranoid. And, for those of you playing at home, those of us who work in cybersecurity, when you're really into looking at how to protect, you're called a paid paranoid because it's your job to be
Yeah.
paranoid about how can people get in. It kind of reminds me of um, like a realtor told me the story of a couple that she was showing a house to, and the wife was like, "Oh, this is so beautiful. I love the glass windows and stuff." And her husband worked in cybersecurity, and he was looking at everything as like, "Do you know how easy it would be to just break through that window and get into the house?" So he was looking at everything from how vulnerable it was
Yeah.
as opposed to how beautiful it
Yeah.
was. And I thought that kind of sums up what the difference between, security and even all the other parts of IT and everything else. It's like, IT inside companies is like what's possible and how to make things more efficient. But if you don't have somebody just paying attention to how could this be used against us or how could somebody get in, you're leaving yourself vulnerable. And that's why, the profession
Yeah.
is so valuable.
Well,
So,
it's
so you really saw that.
it's all about understanding risk. And I think
Hmm.
that's, we see risk so much and we look at things, and I try not to say no, I try to say maybe, and to lay out different things that, my company or whoever I'm talking to should be aware of. And
Right,
then usually from a consulting kind of standpoint, we together as a team make a
right,
decision,
right.
and but at least we have that discussion.
That's great. Now, you're the father of two kids.
Yep.
And have you been the locked down dad, that your family rolls their eyes at because you're making them do all the protections, or are you more relaxed, or what's your approach? And so we can get into what do you recommend, for all the dads listening,
Yeah.
of how do you protect your family without being, the constantly paranoid or instilling fear, which is the antithesis of what you
Well,
do.
I think a little fear is healthy
Yeah.
today.
Uh,
Um,
the right
we,
amount.
yeah, the right amount. I mean, we do. I have to admit, we probably do family security awareness training.
That's
Uh,
great.
to
So
go
tip
ahead
number
and,
one, everybody do family security awareness training.
where the family, we get together and we do talk about these issues, and I kind of, will run them through some scenarios to think about.
Hmm.
You know, and It's a little bit of everything. I mean, we talk about, the family wireless in the house, and how we need to go ahead and lock it down and why, and how we can't have it to where you can see it a block away. It needs to be, within the home. You know, we talk about the computers that we use and how, yes, you do have to do updates. And
Mm-hmm.
yes, you do have to put passwords on things.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally got them to quit writing passwords down and to start using, like, password vault,
Yeah.
software, to
Mm-hmm.
better protect their
Have
passwords.
some kind of a password manager that's
Yeah,
secure. Mm-hmm.
not just on their desktop and their laptop, but also on their cell phone as well. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I've got them to start using, 2FA, using some type of you know, so that when they're logging into important accounts,
Right.
that they use some type of authentication software.
Mm-hmm.
Some, and most, banks and, applications and stuff online now, give you that option or actually make it required,
Right.
and so we've had to do training on that to
Mm-hmm.
explain to them that it's extremely important that they do that. I haven't gotten so crazy to where they need to rotate their passwords every, 30 days or 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
But I do explain the importance of not using the same password for the last 15 years,
Right.
and so we do periodically, kind of change passwords and stuff. And then
Mm-hmm.
it's more than, and I've gotten them to understand that their smartphone, their cell phone that they have, is really a computer when you really
Yes.
think about it. It's just a computer you put in your pocket or you put in your purse.
It's
And I
got more compute power in it than NASA had to launch
Oh
the
yeah,
Apollo
oh yeah,
rocket.
and
So, uh-huh.
I'm telling them, I said, you got to treat it just like you would your home computer and your laptop. You got to do updates. I make sure that, it has, security programs on it to watch for,
Mm-hmm.
viruses and stuff like that, and, to keep it clean, and they do their updates and their passwords. But
Right.
we do more than just that. I mean, we also, my sons like to play video games, so we make sure that, those things are password protected and their authentication mechanisms to protect them, and that they do updates on those and stuff like that. Um, we, so we talk about, and then, some of the other stuff that I do, for them because both of them like to do a lot of video gaming and they're in online chat rooms and stuff. We have discussions about, just because the person you're talking to says they're so and so doesn't mean they actually are.
Just because
You
they're
know?
saying they're your age and live one town over
Yeah,
doesn't mean they're not
yeah,
40 years older or 20 years older and a criminal and living across the world, right?
yeah. And so I try to get them to go ahead and understand you don't release, private data. You don't tell people where we live. You don't, yeah, we live generally in San Diego County.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Right.
quite large. That's
Yes.
good enough.
Yeah.
You know, the it's things like that. I mean, to me, you have to be careful, like
Right.
that.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that because the most recent stats I've seen are that at any one time there are 500,000 predators online globally, and it doesn't matter, and globally means they're on the internet. So,
Yeah,
there's it's not like, somebody with a gun or a dangerous weapon is, in another country. They could be. I think that's the one thing about being in a conflict right now, internationally, is that people have a heightened sense of security. But whether you're in peacetime or wartime, there's always a dangerous neighborhood and a war zone going on online, right? That people don't know. So talk about how do you recommend people listening are talking to their loved ones and kids about how to stay safe without terrifying them. You got
yeah,
to, and it's going to differ for, kids that are 9 and 10 versus teenagers. Let's talk about that. What do you recommend that people do so they have the right level of facts that are concerning, along with how to have agency and be able to protect yourself? How,
yeah.
how do you recommend that?
I mean, I think one of the biggest things, I did as a father was, like when my sons were playing video games and stuff, I just didn't let them go use the technology and just blindly, you know. No, I sat down with them. I played games with them. You
Okay.
know,
Mhm.
um, they're in big world environments playing large games like World of Warcraft and stuff where you get, hundreds, hundreds and hundreds of people playing, I would be in the game with them,
Right.
and doesn't mean that I have to be with them every day, every time, but I would periodically be in with them, and and sit there and be in Discord or be in the different chat services and talking with them, back and forth. So I was aware of who they were talking with, and sometimes, afterwards I would show them, discussions that were going on with other people that were in the chat room, and I would tell them, these kind of discussions are inappropriate,
Oh,
and
that's smart. So
this,
you're looking for those while you're
yeah,
in there, and then you can screenshot them or whatever to
yep.
also show examples, and you
And
can.
I would do things like that, and
Mhm,
even though my sons now are college graduates and they're in their 20s and stuff,
mhm.
they got a whole new other set of threats that they have to worry about, and fraud and all this other kind of stuff they got to worry about.
Right.
And I still, talk to them about these things because even, you think, once your kid's off to college, you're good to go, and hey, I'm done. No, you're not.
Right.
They're still your kid. They can still go ahead and be preyed upon, and they can still, unfortunately, be taken advantage of. Even if it's, you know, both of my sons are, 6 feet and over, they're, tall, men, and but I still worry. They can be in relationships that aren't healthy for them. They can go ahead
Right.
and make decisions that'll have long, unfortunately, lasting repercussions. And so it's things like this that you have discussions, about this, especially online. They're very active in Instagram and Facebook and all these different social media, accounts. And I explained to them, I said, you understand you're leaving footprints that are going to be with you for years. So
Mhm,
think about what you talk about. Think about what you're ranting about. Think
mhm,
about, you and your friends may be joking about something. And then 10 years from now, you may be going and applying for a very high profile job that maybe
mhm.
has a security clearance or something like that. And they're going to go back through your social media
Right.
since you started, and they're going to look at everything that you chatted on and everything that you said. And if you said anything that might have been sexist or racist, or even though it was a joke or whatever,
Mhm.
you just lost that opportunity. I
Right.
said, you need to think about that.
That's great
And
advice because that's also like it could be their dream job or their dream
oh,
company.
yeah,
It could be the gaming company they love
yeah.
most has a perfect position for them,
And
and
I said, and
that
I
you could.
explained to them also, I said, this also reflects on your mother and I. We didn't
Mhm,
raise you to be people like this. So
mhm.
do not do this when
Right.
you're away from us and you're online, and you just think, hey, it's just nothing. No,
Right.
believe me, people who you think are your friends or may take screenshots or whatever, and the next thing you know,
Mhm.
they're like, hey, give me some money, or I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn this loose, and and you're being extorted. I said, these things happen quite a lot,
Mhm.
and unfortunately, we've heard stories of people's young children, teenagers, with sextortion schemes where they've
Mhm.
committed suicide, where they've, and it's bad,
Right.
and so I think, the biggest thing you can take away from that is, as parents, is if your children are actively using technology, you need to be active with them and be
Right.
aware of what they're doing, what chat groups they're in, what, applications, games, stuff like that, that they're playing, and just be involved.
That's such great advice. And let's talk about the sextortion thing for a bit too, because when you've got, you know, 13-year-olds through college age kids, there's interest in, partners and all that interest in learning about relationships and sex and physical things and stuff. And then you've got a predator going on saying they're this boy or this girl or whatever, and and drawing a connection, and then wanting to send photos, and they'll send a
Yep.
photo of supposedly themselves, and they'll get your child to send a naked picture of themselves or a compromising picture of themselves or something that your child would be devastated if it got out, or if their friends at school saw them, or
Yep.
grandparents saw them or whatever. And that's exactly what's happening to more victims every day than we can count anymore. what do you recommend parents do? Because I mean, you're really talking about the prevention, which is what CISOs do, and and Navy CIOs do, and what parents have to do, and in this case, what dads in particular need to do, because these are difficult conversations. And so, what's your advice for how to get those started?
Yeah, I mean, it's, like for my son, for both of my sons, um, unfortunately, found one of those articles that was talking about, what happened, and a child, had committed suicide, and they were going into the whole thing and talking about it, and and they talked about how the parents didn't even know, and they didn't even know that the child was, talking to somebody, via this app and everything, and I had both of my sons read it, and they were teenagers, and they both were in high school then, and I had them read the article, and we sat down and we talked. We had a family discussion where we sat down and we talked, and I walked him through, and I told him, I said, in my job is to fight bad guys.
Hmm.
My job is to go ahead and protect companies and protect employees. And I told him, I said, you understand, I live in this world,
Hmm.
which is the reason why, you and your brother were saying I was paranoid and this, that, and the other. No, I'm not paranoid. I'm educated because I
Hmm.
see how bad it is.
And
You know,
you're more alert than the average
yeah,
person, is safe to
yeah.
say.
And I sit there and I was telling him, I said,
Mhm.
as after they read the article, they were really quiet. I said, understand this young man
Mhm.
didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
You know, he thought he was talking to somebody that was a friend. He
Mhm.
thought he was talking to somebody that he could trust. You
Mhm.
know, they, and I told him, I said, from this being curious about, your own sexuality. I said, that's normal. We all go through it, and
Mhm.
we all go through it our whole life growing up. It doesn't
Right.
stop. And I said,
Right.
and I told him, I said, and so he was doing what he thought, was natural to him, talking to somebody who he thought was a friend that he could
Mhm.
trust, and they used it against him.
Right.
And I sit there and I was telling my sons, I said, anything like this happens, it's not the end of the world.
Mhm.
I said,
Right.
trust me on this. It's
Mhm.
not the end of the world.
We'll get through it. We'll get through
Yes,
it.
I'm saying is we will get through it. I
Mhm.
said, are you going to be embarrassed? Yeah. Oh my God, I just feel so bad about this. I got that, you know,
Right.
but
Well, and one piece of bad news that also has a bizarre good news upside is with Nudify apps, you don't even have to send a photo. They can just take any photo of you. They could take a photo of you, playing your sport or just standing with your friends and make you look
yeah,
naked and put you in a compromising, situation. So even if it was a real photo, you could even claim it isn't. I mean, so there's this whole thing of Nudify. So how do you recommend, how would you as a dad, if you had younger kids today, talk about Nudify apps and what your kids should do.
I mean, I think, the big thing is just having an honest discussion with them that it's not appropriate to
Hmm.
do stuff like that. It's not
Hmm.
it's not appropriate to do that to friends or to do that to themselves,
Right.
playing with it to see what they could build and then send it to people. And then
Hmm.
walk them through consequences, what could happen, how
Hmm.
quickly something like this could snowball
Right.
and how quickly something like this could really get them in trouble.
Hmm.
And you may think at, 12 years old, 13 years old, uh, 18, that's a lifetime from now,
Right.
you know,
Right.
but it's not. In the blink of an eye, you're getting ready to go to college,
Yeah.
but you now have, a felony on your record because you did this to a couple of 12-year-old girls
Hmm.
and it was considered to be, child porn.
Hmm.
And, what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
you've ruined your life before you've even started it,
Right. Well, I
and
think that showing consequences is so ultimately important because we're
yeah,
what is it? We're in I can't remember what age in our 20s we are before we have a fully developed reasoning, rational prefrontal cortex to think with. And so,
and
parents
when
have to
they're
substitute that. Parents
and
have
when,
to
and when
be
they're
the
so young, they
reality.
have no concept of that.
Exactly. Exactly.
They just don't understand, you know,
Hmm.
yeah, the time and distance there is just,
Right,
yeah,
right.
it does freak me out as a father.
But it does, and also it helps create the bond. And frankly, for fathers, since we're talking about Father's Day, it really lets you be that, protector and helping your kids learn how to protect themselves. And so I love that advice. And this is true for all parents and grandparents and all caregivers if you've got kids in
Oh
your
yeah.
life. So that's great.
I mean, I actually tell my son, I said, look, I'm never going to be mad at you about these things. I
Hmm.
said, what I get angry about is you don't ask the question.
Yeah,
You don't
that's
come and
good.
talk to me and say, Dad, what about this? Or
Uh-huh.
Dad, I got a question about this. It's like,
Yeah,
I'm not going to get angry at you that something happened. I'm going to get angry at you that you'd never come and talk to me. You just
right.
don't ask the question,
Yeah.
because
And that's
that's what
great.
I'm here for. You're not letting
Mhm.
me do my job.
And they'll remember that. Yeah, which is to protect you. I love that. Now you were talking about the cell phones in their hands and stuff, and you've sat on the boards of two mobile security companies, and most of us basically live on our phones.
Oh yeah.
What's a phone habit that you wish every listener would start this week if they're not doing that already?
Um, Besides having some type of a password on their phone,
Sure.
um,
Or what are the top three things you think that
yeah,
people
I
should
mean,
be
the
doing?
biggest things is making sure that you've got some type of a password on the phone so that, it's just, you just won't pick it up and just start using it. That you definitely do updates and you're religious about making sure that the things are updated. And then the third thing would be that you have some type of security software on your phone that scans for and watches, for applications that are doing things outside the norm.
Now, a lot of people say, well, doesn't it come with that? Or I thought my
No.
phone had it and stuff. And that's the question I get all the time. So
Yeah, and
how
a
would you
lot of
answer that?
times, they don't, or a lot of times, actually, a lot of times your cell phone provider will actually have it.
Hmm.
You just have to turn it on.
Yeah. I know people have more security unturned on their cell phone that, I
Yeah.
mean, it's the equivalent of what companies are having to pay tens of millions of
Oh
dollars
yeah.
for to get the same effect. And you can literally just toggle it on, but it doesn't come that way out of the gate. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
and
why that's one of the steps that we talk about in here too, in the layers in the safety essentials is
oh
what
yeah,
to turn on. Yeah.
and I think probably a fourth thing would be just periodically look at your phone and the apps that you have on it.
Hmm.
If you're not using these apps and and they've been put to sleep because you haven't been using them for months,
Hmm.
then remove them. Do
Just
you
delete
really
them.
need them?
Well, and let's talk about that because I always chuckle when I'm downloading an app or re-downloading an app because if I'm not using them, I do delete them. And it says, that thing about ask app not to track instead of, deny. It says ask app. I mean, the wording of
Yeah.
that is intentional. Explain to people why and what's possible, what could be happening.
Well, I mean, I think what it comes down to is even if they're like asleep, they're going to be passively monitoring and
Mhm.
collecting data on you. And the biggest thing you
Like
don't
like where
realize,
you go and what
yep,
you're interested in and
yeah,
yeah,
where you
what
go
you
and what you're
search.
searching on, and that data gets that data gets sold.
Mhm.
Unless you live in places where it's explicit from a privacy perspective,
Right.
that data gets sold. So you think about it, whoever's giving you that app for free, if you're downloading and you're getting apps for free, okay, they're still making money off of you. They're
Right.
making money off of you another way, and that is basically the data that they're collecting on you, and they're packaging that up and selling it to a reseller.
Well,
You
let's just
know,
talk about that for a second, because a lot of people are like, "Oh my gosh, I was, out with a friend and we were talking about this thing and I looked something up and the next thing I know, I'm seeing ads for it everywhere and they're immediately thinking their phone's listening to them." That's another topic. But also a lot of it is just that data, is just getting collected and
yeah.
sold and you don't need to just worry about your data that's been stolen and breached and is on the dark web, but your data that is sold legally through data brokers.
Yep. And the thing about this too is you got to look at with AI now, you can take, these different, databases of like say data that's been stolen.
Mm-hmm.
So you take those, throw those in a bucket. You take data that they might scrape off of social media accounts and stuff that you have, throw those in a bucket. And then you take data that they could, buy from online brokers, that show where you're shopping and what you're buying and where you're traveling to. and websites and things like that that you're looking
Yeah.
at. You throw those in a bucket, and then AI can actually put together some really interesting portfolios on you.
Yeah.
And if they're doing that, with you and say, like for me, my wife, and then my sons, they can get a pretty good idea of, how my family shops, how we spend money, how we doing on the web, things that we have at home or things that, we'll probably want to go ahead and buy. Yeah, it's frightening how smart some of this stuff is. And
Right.
and then people wonder, these targeted things that pop up, and they're like, well, are they listening to me? Probably. And it may be, hey, that app that you think is listening to you probably isn't. It's one of those other apps that you think is asleep that's just passively collecting data and they're selling it on you. I
Right.
mean,
And when you downloaded it, if you don't turn off the access to your microphone and your camera, you're basically
yep.
telling it it can access your phone and your
And
camera
there's
anytime it wants.
and there's a lot of times where, like, I download, like, maybe I know I'm going to be sitting for hours, so I'm going to download and play a game. Why does this game need access to my microphone and my camera?
Exactly, exactly.
It's not
It's
a
not,
video
I mean,
game.
like a language app, understandable, but why
Oh yeah.
this
Oh yeah.
gaming app that is never, you're never talking to, there's
I'm
no,
playing like I'm playing Tetris. Why does it need access to my, and so these things you start clicking and it's like,
um,
because I'm now a product.
right,
Yeah.
right. And they're getting that information and they can sell it, so why not? Yeah.
Yep.
You brought up AI. Let's talk about that. I've got two questions for you, which is let's talk a little bit about AI and the risk. And then let's also talk about how AI can help people protect themselves.
Oh yeah.
So the whole AI and risk and stuff, what do you want people to know? And especially parents who are, concerned about protecting themselves and just people in general. How do you protect yourself in this AI age? And what are the risks you're seeing that are likely to be hitting, consumers and citizens? And what do people need to know?
Well, I mean, I think one thing is you're not going to get away from it. It's everywhere.
Hmm.
I mean, it's already being used in movies. It's already being used, online, um, in in everything from podcasts to, to applications to, so I mean, it isn't something that you're going to get away from,
Right,
and so I remind my son that, both of my sons, that when and one of my sons is actually in a couple weeks, he's graduating with his master's degree in data science and AI from
there.
UCSD. So,
Oh, there you
you know,
go. That's
uh,
awesome.
so he's someone like me who's a heavy user of it.
Hmm.
And even with him, I one of the things I remind him is question your outputs always.
Hmm.
Because when you really think about it, AI, you can use it to create amazing things.
Right,
You can use it to go ahead and, like my wife had this huge list of people that she was putting together and a bunch of information for her birthday party that we're
right.
going to be doing in August. And so I used AI to quickly build something for her so that instead of having her to manually take this information and put it into a spreadsheet and everything. I use Claude to build something very quickly for her.
Right.
But I told her, I said, even after it's done, woohoo, she's all happy. Now go back through it and verify all the data transferred
Yeah.
correctly.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things that you can use it to do stuff and
Hmm.
actually, you know, get rid of some of the long, drawn out, kind of burdensome things that, you would used to do that you would use computers and stuff for.
Right.
But, still never 100% trust it. You need to look at and make sure, is it saying what you wanted it to say?
Right.
Is the data correct? I use it at times when I'm doing research and everything because I write books and I write articles and stuff.
Hmm.
And I always will take a look at, the links and everything that it cites, and I'll go back and I'll check and I'll verify and make sure it's accurate. And I'll even reread whatever it's citing just to verify, okay, is it citing what I think it is? Um,
Hmm.
and so it's just things that, you've constantly got to go ahead and ask,
Hmm.
and remind yourself that, you may be using it for good, but again, it's made by humans,
Yeah.
and so nothing's 100%. There's
I
always going
love
to be
that.
a chance for some type of fault or some type of issue.
Well, it's very much like anything, like I think this is the opportunity for all people to get good at delegating. And delegating is different from dumping, which is I'm not
Yeah,
going to do this, I'm going to put it over there. One of the things in the companies I work with, they talk all the time about, the leaders will talk about like getting AI slop from their team. And it's like, well, I prefer to think that it's human slop because it's humans who just ran something from AI and didn't read it, didn't give it anything. I find even with really good engineering prompts, I find, AI is about 90% accurate, sometimes 85, sometimes a little more, but there's always something in an area where you're an expert that you can catch things that it missed or things that it got wrong because it, like you said, it's pulling
yeah,
from human based databases of information. And so if somebody's just taking it and turning it in as their assignment at school or as their project at work or just using it as a plan to start with and they're not putting any thinking in. Some people are saying AI is making us stupid. It's actually making me smarter, but it's making you stupid if you're not thinking anymore, if you're
yeah,
handing it off. Is that right?
yeah. I mean, I think you've got to. I think, just like you said, I mean, you're using it as a tool to be able
Mhm.
to be more effective. You're not using it just to take over,
Right.
what you're doing so that you're no longer
Right.
thinking. No, no, no. You should be using it to go ahead and help you, be
Mhm.
able to do things quicker or to be able to do more research and, go in depth, on some things. And like you said, you've already got knowledge. You've already got, some extensive experience in a certain area, and you need to read what you put together and
Mhm.
and make adjustments to it and everything to make sure it's saying what you want to say. I mean, even if I use it to write an article, I will already have an idea what I want to write. I'll already have mind mapped out how I want to break it down, what I want to say, and what I want the user to take away before I even start writing.
Right.
And then if I use Claude or something like that to go ahead and help flesh out things, I still go back through and we'll adjust it and make changes and stuff and add things because, like you said, it misses things, and so I think that's the biggest thing for, the listeners to take in is that don't be afraid of it. Be willing to go ahead and use it, but understand you have to actively, participate with it, and make sure that it's saying what you want it to say and make sure that it's
Right.
doing what you want it to do.
No, that's such great advice. And, you know, y- one thing around this too, like with AI, um, how do you see, because you're connected, and you not only speak at the conferences, but you're connected to all the top companies and technologies, and you've got a couple 100,000 followers easily who are mostly in cybersecurity as well. Um, so what do you see coming in your cybersecurity crystal ball, Gary? What would you think is going to be coming that's going to help people better protect themselves? Like how do you see AI helping people, hopefully, and we can't predict time, but somewhere in the
Yeah.
next 2 to 5 years, helping people from, being protected from cyber criminals and from hackers, because we keep seeing the list growing of how hackers are using this. How is the list going to grow for how AI is helping protect people?
Well, I mean, I think, in fact, I was at a keynote last week where we had a big discussion on this. And really, I mean, pretty much we're using AI to fight AI. Is really what it comes down to. And no matter how you look at it, the cyber criminals, the bad guys, they tend to lead, and then we tend to lag, and it goes back and forth, you know, kind of almost like the Cold War, it kind of goes back and forth where both sides, you know, um, you know, both sides innovate and then come down, and they innovate and they come down, and both sides respond, and that's really where we're at now. I mean, we see where cyber criminals are, they are using AI tools to better their dev process, to be able to collect data and to be able to, find better targets, and, companies to attack, to negotiate ransomware, payments. They're using it to do different things. And eventually there's discussions that there'll be agentic ransomware that'll be able to just, operate on its own. Um, and I don't think these things are years away. I think these things are months away.
Right.
There's already being shown in lab. Things are already moving. With that said, I'm talking with startups that are doing really fascinating stuff on our side. where they're able to see models that are starting to shift and go outside their guardrails so that you can stop them and go ahead and make corrections. Um, they're
So basically an AI agentic workforce of a security team that will stop things before
yeah.
they get into systems they
Because
shouldn't be getting into and
you
getting
already
data.
start getting alerts,
Mhm,
that, hey, this thing is no longer doing the norm. It's no longer doing what you assigned it to do.
mhm,
And a lot of times when you take a look at it, it isn't because the bad guy has taken over it. It's because what's happened is that model or that agent, you've given it a specific job. It's got a specific workflow. It's run to something blocking it, and now it's figuring out creative ways to go around it. It just
mhm.
happens to be those creative ways are some serious security issues,
Right.
and so I've already seen technologies that are being built to monitor for that, to tag that, to alert you, to sandbox that. Um, and more of this is starting to become the norm that people are implementing, that companies are implementing and are testing. And then I even see security teams now that are changing to where it's no longer humans on the teams. You're going to have,
Mhm,
agents doing stuff as well. You're going to have LLMs that are being used to do specific things. And I've told peers of mine, you can't, run away from that.
right.
Whether you like it or not, you're going to have digital team members. You're going to have, you know, will they be doing everything that, a human person that you have on your team doing? No. And
Mhm,
they're not there to do that. They're there to do specific things that you've assigned them, that you've given them permissions for, that you've, given them data for. And and so they can do that while your team members, do other things that you want to work on, projects that you've had to put off and stuff. Um,
mhm.
does that mean that your team is going to be such and such numbers? No, you will probably, maybe you'll lose 10% of your team and you'll be expected to use AI to automate and use AI, agents and different stuff like that. Honestly, I think that's going to be the norm. You
Right.
know, that doesn't mean that, cyber is going to go away or that, the chief information security officer role or the security engineer or the security architect roles are going to go away. But it does
They've
mean,
just gotten more complex
yeah,
actually because they've
but
got
it
to,
does mean
there's a
they're going
greater
to change.
threat. There's AI threats have increased
Yeah. I
and
mean,
how you're defending has increased.
it's just what it means is you're going to have to, you got more education to do. There's
Right.
going to be new skill sets that are going to be required that you're
Right.
going to hire for or that your
Mhm.
staff's going to have to train for.
So what do you
Cyber's
think?
still cyber.
And so what about for the average person at home, the dad who's listening, or the parents, or or just the worker and or college student out there who's going, okay, what can I do? So if you were gonna give everybody what's one thing to think about or do before you go to bed tonight to protect yourself, what would be some good advice for them?
The I think one of the things, I mean, just what I recommended to my sons who were getting ready to graduate college and stuff,
Mhm,
you know, um, I told them straight away, I said, if you're not using, AI right now, whether it's Chat GPT or Gemini or Anthropic or, I mean, or Claude or whatever, you need to go ahead and take some classes in it.
mhm,
Even if it's just some beginning classes so you understand the basics, you understand how to use it, you need to
mhm.
be comfortable with it
And
because you're gonna,
Claude just opened up Academy for
oh
free. This
yeah,
used to be
yeah,
something
they
you'd
have,
pay $1,000 to get that kind
oh
of
yeah,
access to. So
yeah. And I was sitting there, and both of my sons are doing, courses, in it right now.
that's good.
Claude
So learn
101.
AI.
Yeah,
You'll
learn
also
it.
then be able to spot AI being used against you, and you'll be able to be closer to learning how to have AI help you in this new world we're in.
Yeah, because I mean, you're going to understand how you're not going to have like a huge architect engineer type, mind meld with it, but
Right.
you're going to understand the basics of what it is,
Yeah.
how it's used, around you,
Right.
and so it's
Right.
just, it's something that you need to get comfortable with because it's
Yeah.
going to be in the world around you now.
Right. Well, and that's such great advice. And you've, you know, I don't, the leaderboard has lost track of how many cyber attacks you've prevented and helped thwart and, help companies recover from. And because you've been an advisor, board member, and then chief information security officer, CISO. And by the way, you just left your last position. So so people are looking, need somebody. I cannot recommend Gary more highly because you have such experience and you've got one of the most incredible, resumes anybody will ever see in the field and are an in-house expert. So, how can people best reach you or follow you?
I say probably the best way to just be on LinkedIn.
Perfect.
Just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I do answer my messages and everything, and I will get back to you.
That's
So it's like, yeah, that's usually the easiest way.
That's awesome. And follow him. He shares such great information. That is so awesome. So thank you for that, Gary Hayslip, and for joining us. And thank you for your service.
Thank
And
you very
thank
much.
you for helping all of our listeners learn how to protect themselves and their families and help dads be better protectors and dads on this Father's Day special edition. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
So you heard everybody, you know what to do and you know who to follow. And just please take a piece of advice and do all of it, or at least do one thing today. You'll be doing yourself and everyone you care about a huge favor and service. And until next time, stay safe out there.